In this video I'm going to start a new project, and it is this. It's a Siemens Reperforator. If you're not familiar with reperforators, then what they were for is to take a reel of blank paper tape and turn it into punched paper tape. So essentially you would type whatever characters you wanted on the paper tape, and in this case the paper tape would exit the machine on the left hand side, and then you could either keep the paper tape for later use or feed it directly into a teletype or something similar to send down a phone line or whatever you wanted to do with it. Later on, the functionality in this became incorporated into the teleprinters directly. You had tape punches that were built directly in. So really this is a combination keyboard and paper tape punch. This one has a document holder on the front, and the blank paper tape sits behind the document holder. It's seen better days. It does need a lot of work. I've had this for quite a long time and it's a project I've been meaning to get onto, but there are quite a few issues with it. It's seized up, the case or the frame is broken, so I think someone's been trying to pick it up from the front. If you do need to carry one of these, there are handles on the side, otherwise this happens. So I'll need to either weld or find some way of fixing this. It's cast aluminium, so a bit of a pain to fix, but I'll find a solution for that. I'm just going to take the top off. We'll have a quick look at the mechanism and see what we're up against. And usually this one also has its base. There's a base plate on the bottom, and normally it goes missing, but this unit actually has that fitted. It's also a 220 volt version. This is a German version. But it is 220 volts, so I can use this directly on the mains, but I will need to do quite a lot of work before I plug it in. If I try to just power it up now, it would almost certainly just destroy itself. So I'm just going to get the reel holder and the document holder out of the way, and then we'll take the cover off and have a look inside. I've removed the two screws that hold this in place, and now this will just lift off. We can put that to one side, and the next thing we can do is take this cover off. So there are two main parts to this. We have the keyboard, which is what really amounts to what will be a transmitter on a teleprinter, and then we have the punch, which is the part that's under this cover. So I'll just get this out of the way. We'll put that to one side, and I haven't really looked at this yet. As I said, I've had it for quite a long time, but this is the first time I've looked at this. Let's move the camera down a bit. Okay, so as you can see, we have a fairly complex punch mechanism. I will go over how all this works as we go through the repair and restoration. Some parts do seem to actually work. And some don't, and as I say, it's in reasonable condition. It's tatty and needs a lot of work, but it does seem to be largely complete, so it's looking quite promising from that aspect. It is dry, there's some rust in here, it won't turn. The bulb is to tell you it's getting towards the end of the line. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is strip it right down to the bare chassis, carry out any repairs to the chassis, and then we'll start rebuilding and carry out any repairs as we go. So the next thing I'm going to do is flip this upside down, and then we'll have a look underneath and see what the state of the internal keyboard mechanism is. As I say, I haven't looked inside this yet, so I've got no idea what to expect in there. Hopefully it's recoverable. So this is a look at the underside with the cover still on. This hole here is the CHAD chute outlet, so this is where the CHAD comes out when it's punching the tape. Just remove the remaining screw. I can now take the bottom cover off. Okay, I'm not sure how well you can see this. Somebody's obviously had a go at repairing this. fairly glad I didn't try and plug this in. This bare wire here is the live wire, and the earth is not connected at all, and lots of strands of wire, and the neutral is the one just underneath that appears to be touching. So this is really why you take these things apart before you try and power them up. So what we have under here are the encoder bars. So we've seen things like this in the teletypes, the ASR33. They all work in a fairly similar way, but I will need to completely strip this down. Some of these aren't moving, and overall doesn't look too bad at all. It is desperately in need of a clean, and as I say, we do have some physical damage. This incidentally won't work properly with the frame broken. It does require the frame to be intact for this to operate correctly. Okay, so what we can do now is start stripping this down. So I'm going to start by taking this front surround off. As I say, it does need repairing, so if I get this out of the way, it's going to avoid doing any more damage, and will also give us more access to the other parts, and we can start taking the entire mechanism apart. Okay, so I've taken the two screws out of the right hand side. These, if you do one of these will be tight. It's steel into aluminium, so they can be a bit of a pain to get out, but I always try to spend time here making sure I don't damage them. If you strip the head off one, it gives you a major problem, and also you've then got to find a replacement screw. So I've taken the two screws out. So normally you'd have to take all four out, but because this is broken into two pieces, this should now come out. Okay, so we've got that piece out of the way. I'll do the same thing with the other side, and then that will be the front frame completely removed. Okay, so that's the two pieces of the frame removed. As I say, I will have to find means by which to repair this, and perhaps do an entire video on that. This is a fairly common problem with this type of equipment, and finding ways to effect repairs on small and thin castings is always a bit of an issue. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is take out the bulb. I don't know if this is any good, so we'll give this a quick buzz with the multimeter and see if the filament's okay. Okay, I can't see any breaks in there, but you can't always tell, so we'll get the multimeter and see what it reads. 170 ohms, so that seems reasonable. It's not open circuit, so it looks like that may actually work. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is separate the punch mechanism from the main chassis. There are various ways you can do this. You can strip down a lot of this while it's still on the machine, but what I tend to prefer to do is strip these machines down into their major sub-assemblies and then work on those assemblies separately. So I'll just get this removed from the chassis. Just a few screws I need to remove, and then this will start to lift off. I've removed the three screws that hold this main assembly to the chassis, and I've also removed the spacer that controls the position of the selection, the encoder bars. So with this out of the way, this will almost lift off. The only thing that's left connecting is the actuator bar. Now you can access this. Incidentally, I've also removed the paper feed chute. What's holding this in place now is the catch. Let's flip this up. You can access it from the side of the machine. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Let's bring the light down a bit. So if we look in here, there's this catch, and if you pull this top lever up, the catch will disengage from the actuator bar. You can access this through the side of the machine, which is how I'm going to do it. So all I'm going to do is feed this through from the side. There is a slot this can go into to release, and then if you just lift this, then the this link will disconnect, which is what I'm going to do. All you need to do then is position the main punch assembly so that the selection bars, the encoder bars, will clear through the main chassis. So if you lift this up and then start lifting the main assembly, you'll see that this link will separate, and then you can get the two parts to release. So that's what I'm going to do now, but once you've got it released, it won't lift straight up because you've got these actuator bars that come up, they go across, and although you can't see it, they then hook to the right and they would catch on here, but there is a cutout in the chassis, so you need to do is bring these all close together and they will fit through that cutout. So it's a case of just wiggling this around. I'm going to do it off camera because I can't really reach around the camera to do this while releasing the actuator lever, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to release the catch, start lifting this, bring it forward, squeeze these together, and then this entire assembly will lift off. I'm also going to disconnect the two power wires that are connected to the terminal block at the back, because the wires pass down through into the chassis, and of course I need those disconnected to get this off. Okay, I have the linkage disconnected, but I still can't get this off. Normally at this point you could rotate this cam to bring the eccentric up. That then disengages the fingers and allows you to move this out and lift it off. I can't do that. This is completely seized up, so I'm going to have to, I don't want to force this and risk damaging something. So what I'm going to do instead is take off the character counter and then disconnect the cross links. There's a series of small cross links that link the selector bars to the punch pins, and that's kind of what allows them to punch or not punch. But I'll need to disconnect the clips that hold those in place. I can't get the cross-link pins to come out without rotating the cam. The cam's seized up, so I'm going to get the character counter out of the way, and then I can disconnect the selector bars from the cross-link pins. Okay, so I've removed the two screws that hold the character counter in place. That can be moved to one side, got some wires on it which I don't want to disconnect at this point. And I can now start unclipping the cross links, just a small spring clip on each one. Just lift it vertically upwards and then the link will disconnect. There's only 5 on here, it's just a 5-pin punch, of course. And that's the last one. So these are now all free. I prefer to take these out because these are going to drop out anyway, and I'd rather they came out still attached to the selector bars, but as you can see they're not going to come out without being separated. So I'll release all these, and now I should be able to lift this, pop these through the slot in the chassis, and then this entire thing should lift up. Okay, so that's the punch mechanism completely removed. All the selector bars seem to be in good condition, and this down here is the link that I disconnected earlier. So we'll get this out of the way and we can look at stripping down the remainder of the chassis. I've removed the two screws that hold the chad chute in place, so I can lift that out of the way. We've then got a series of bolts that hold the main encoder system to the chassis. But before I take those out, I need to remove the two bars at the back. So there's a single screw at the right hand side. I can take that out and I should then be able to slide these bars out. If you don't do that, you can't get these are the key bars, you can't get these bars to disconnect with the top shaft because it's there's kind of a hook behind it and you can't get them low enough. So you could take out just the bottom, but I'm going to take out both of these. Once the screw's removed, you can pull out the large washer that sits in these two grooves, and then the two bars should slide out. Interestingly, I don't know where this has been, but bits of gravel keep dropping out of it, so must have had an interesting history, but let's try and get these out. Okay, sometimes it can be really tight, but these are quite nice and loose. So we'll get those out of the way. That's the first one. Okay, so what we can do now is take the screws out that hold the encoder system to the chassis, and then the entire encoder system should drop out of the chassis. I've removed the spring bar and the 5 million springs that were in there, and we should now be able to take this entire mechanism out, complete with all the keys. Okay, so that's the entire encoder mechanism out. I'm not too concerned about having removed all the springs. I've got to strip this all down and remove the encoder bars anyway. So these are the encoder bars, and they sit on the bottom of this mechanism. They all need taking out. Some are stuck, and they're not really corroded, but they got dirt and muck and whatever else on there, so I will need to take them off. Keys aren't too bad, so I'm not going to recondition these keys. I'm just going to clean them, so I'm not going to do new inserts. They're not that bad, and I think they'll clean up fairly well. I can polish the surrounds, they'll come up nice and clean. I can polish up the original plastic keys, and then we can reassemble the entire thing. Reassembling this is a bit of a pain because you've got to get all these springs back in, but the easiest way of doing this is mount it all on without the springs, take the screws out one at a time, put the spring in, put the screw back in. If you try and do it the other way around, you've got to align everything and with all the springs at once, and it's almost impossible. Okay, but we'll come to that when we start reassembling this. In the meantime, I'll put this to one side and we will finish stripping down the chassis. So all that's left in the chassis now is the electrical system, and that comprises of just the incoming mains cable clamp, terminal block, a few little clamps here and there, and the power switch. And you can see here, this is precisely why I always strip these units down before I attempt to plug them in. This was just a disaster waiting to happen, so as I said, this is why I always strip these down before I attempt to power them up. So I'll just get this completely stripped, and we'll see what we've got. So that's the electrical unit removed. Another quick look at this horror show. So I will of course be replacing the incoming mains cable, and that's the chassis completely stripped. This part of the chassis seems to be in good conditions, no breaks, no more cracks, and I won't even need to repaint this. So I will need to repaint the front part of course, because I've got to weld up the brake, but this will clean up very nicely. If you're interested in what that is, I'll let you try and work it out. And that's what's on the name badge. It says 220 volts, locale I can't read, and it's a 32 character device, a 5-bit device. Looks quite good. Okay, so we've gone from a rusty pile of junk to now about 5 or 6 rusty piles of junk. So in the coming videos in this series, we'll try and get this reassembled into a working reperforator. It's quite a lot of work to do, especially on the punch mechanism. I don't know what condition the punch pins will be in. I don't know if the motor will even spin, if it's burnt out or needs rewinding, but all the parts will clean up reasonably well. I haven't seen anything that seems unrecoverable. So in the next videos we'll start working on this and getting it put back into working condition.